Hello, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join us for our Delaware VDA webinar series. My name is Sarah Stojkovic. I'm with DMA, and today I have colleagues with me, Jamie and Jamil from Bailey Cavalieri. Nice to see you, as usual, face-to-face. So today, we're going to start discussing scoping, which I honestly think is probably the most important part of the Delaware VDA, to be honest with you. So I just wanted to have a nice conversation with you on some questions I had from your angle on what the importance of the scoping is. So to start, what are some areas that a company may have potential unclaimed property exposure?
The common areas are accounts payable, accounts receivable credits, some inventory, those types of areas. If you're a public company, you may have securities, unclaimed securities. Also, if you have, there may be specialized property types in certain companies, gift cards, refunds, rebates, those types of areas.
Good. Jamil, why don't you answer this next one? How can different business activities relate to unclaimed property risk?
Well, Sarah, I think in my view, your type of business almost controls fully what unclaimed property exposure that you have. If you think to yourself as a business, what areas of my business do I interact with third parties, whether that's customers, whether that's vendors, or whether that's even, as Jamie mentioned, maybe it's shareholders. What aspects of my business could cause my company to owe money or other obligations to those folks? And so that's probably where I would level set is, hey, what aspects of my business could result in my company owing money to others?
Interesting. And why is understanding an organization's history important during the review?
There are real pitfalls out there if you don't have a good understanding of the history of the company. Acquisitions, prior acquisitions, and did the prior company have a good unclaimed property compliance record? Was that acquisition done as a stock purchase or an asset purchase? Does your company have old subsidiaries that are no longer active? Old legacy computer systems that aren't being used anymore? You really need to understand those things in order to get the proper scoping.
So with that said, how would an organization approach understanding and analyzing their company's data during this process?
Sarah, it's a difficult task, for companies, especially if the company doesn't have a robust policies and procedures related to unclaimed property or a robust unclaimed property reporting history. But primarily, if we're talking about the property types that Jamie mentioned, for example, accounts payable, for that process, we're really looking at that uncashed checks. So when you're looking at uncashed checks, what is your voided check process? Are you able to tie voided checks to the original issuance date of the original check and processes like that? Account receivable credits, the same thing. How are those tracked? How far back do your records go? So if I'm starting that process internally, I really want to know, have we changed records keeping systems? How far back do our complete and researchable records go? And then what is the quality really of those records, for that period?
Yeah, I agree with that. So let's talk about ERP systems, because I know that absolutely has an impact on these reviews. How does it impact it on a detailed basis?
ERP conversions are really important to understand. It's that little thing, that they used to talk about garbage in, garbage out. It's a similar type of idea. If the conversions aren't done correctly, data can be isolated, data can be lost, data can be unsearchable. And so understanding what has happened in the ERP conversion and verifying and validating that the conversion has been done correctly is very important.
Right. And another thing that I see frequently when we're doing these reviews is companies with large subsidiary structures. How does an organization identify and map all these legal entities to get them in scope for the review period?
Well, Sarah, I think you mentioned at the top of this series that the scoping is probably one of the most important aspects of the Delaware VDA process. I agree with you. And I think scoping in the correct entities is part of that process. you're going to need to involve your legal team. You're going to need to involve your record keeping folks to figure out, which legacy subsidiaries are active and inactive. Certainly from a Delaware VDA perspective, Delaware is going to want you to include all Delaware incorporated entities and whether those entities are active or inactive. And also in your org chart, you're also going to have entities that are non-Delaware domiciled. However, if they have a lot of Delaware activity, you're going to want to include those entities within the scope of the VDA as well. The one aspect of the VDA process that I think is helpful to holders is more control over this scoping process. And so it's going to be up to the holder, again, to go through the org chart, determine which entities have the most Delaware activity or are Delaware incorporated, and then make sure those entities are included within the scope of the VDA.
Yep. So what are some of the common pitfall areas that you see during scoping? Because definitely know I've seen quite a few.
Sure, Sarah. And similar to some of the previous discussions we've had here today, forgetting about inactive subsidiaries, forgetting about inactive systems, not paying attention to your prior acquisition or disposition history, those are some of the common pitfalls.
Right. And I want to add in one point here that a lot of accounting errors that you typically see during the review are some of the pitfalls that an organization typically knows in advance.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much for joining me today to discuss this. As I said, I do think that the scoping period, the scoping review is probably the most important part of jumping into the Delaware VDA. And thank you everyone for joining us today to discuss the scoping period. And we will see you soon for more Delaware webinar episodes.